Hi everyone, how's it going?
Hey.
I am so happy to be here tonight. First off, just want to say thank you to Jess. As she mentioned, she just came in on our most recent round of fundraising. We just announced our Series A. I think of all the investors I met and talked with in the process, I just thought she was the coolest and one that in so many ways would be awesome to have be a part of everything we're building. I think as a founder, it's hard to find people who are really willing to roll up their sleeves and work with you on each step of the journey, and I think the whole Workbench team has just been amazing for us so far. So really happy to be here. So what is RippleMatch and what are we doing? How many of you remember what it was like to find your first job? Did anyone just have like a totally easy, seamless process? Maybe like a couple of you, right? But probably not too many. So what we do is help companies find great college students regardless of where they go to school. So I went to college at Yale where there were some options on campus. There was a lot of finance and consulting, but it was still really, really hard to find companies that were actually a fit for what I wanted to do. And for my friends back home in Colorado, a lot of whom were incredibly talented but came from really different socioeconomic backgrounds than a lot of my friends at Yale, it was really, really hard to even get access to companies at all. It was just like an incredibly challenging process. And the reason that is because companies can only go so many places. They have to allocate their resources in a relatively narrow number of areas, and that means that they often end up visiting 2 or 3 campuses, often the campuses that are close by, where a founder wishes they went to school or where a founder actually went to school. So it's not a very representative set of campuses. And so what we believed wholeheartedly was that there's an incredible range of talent that's distributed all over the country, and we wanted to make it possible for companies to find the right candidates regardless of who those candidates knew, regardless of where those candidates went to school. And we wanted to build a product that could actually do that. And so what you're seeing in front of you is the employer view on our demo. This is what it actually looks like to be an employer using RippleMatch. And the way that our product works is, as a company, you're able to put in everything you're looking for in a candidate. As a candidate, you're able to put in everything you're looking for in a company. We actually have teams all over the country who form partnerships with student clubs and organizations and get students signed up and on the platform. And the product that we sort of sought out to build was what we wished we had when we were going through the job search process. And so the way that RippleMatch works is you are able to get an ally, an advocate, someone basically scouring the country for opportunities, pairing you with them, and then bringing you into those processes in a fast-tracked manner. And so what happens on the student end is you dive in on everything that you care about from a sort of values perspective. So some of what you'll dive in on is where you want to move after graduation, things like compensation, company prestige, social impact, all the sort of different factors that go into a job potentially being a good fit or not a good fit. And you also fill out kind of the bread and butter stuff that you see so often. So your internships, the clubs you're involved with on campus, you'll dive in on your resume and kind of get that uploaded to the system. And you'll provide a pretty comprehensive look for employers of who you actually are. And then on the employer end, what happens is you're able to go in and put in everything that you are looking for in a candidate. So one really key difference between the way that our system works and the way that sort of job descriptions work is when you think about an employer traditionally posting a job description, you have to be really sort of marketing forward, which means companies end up providing this sort of picture of their office and their company that's often not very accurate to what they're actually looking for in candidates. So I don't know if any of you can remember the last time you saw a job description that said we have terrible work-life balance and really struggle with gender diversity. That probably hasn't happened, right? It's not something that happens a lot. And so what we allow employers to do is really honestly lay out what they're looking for at the start of the process, and so candidates don't find out and get surprised after they've already invested a lot of time, and that identification is able to be really accurate and really granular from the beginning. And so as a company, you'll dive in, put in everything that you're looking for in a candidate. You'll rank everything. A lot of what we do is help, as I've mentioned, employers broaden out beyond the schools that they usually recruit at to schools all over the country. And you'll also get super focused on things like majors, work experiences, clubs. You can dive in on hard skills, so especially for technical candidates, programming languages, end up being really important. And then you're able to sort of weight all of these different priorities against each other. So no one candidate has every single quality. I think recruiting, for anyone who's kind of done it before, you realize is very often a game of trade-offs. And so we force employers to prioritize what they care about and what they don't care about. Maybe you're going to be a stickler on having all the right work experience and you need a varsity athlete, but then you got to be open in terms of what school the candidate actually came from. So you're filling in all of this data. As an employer, huge focus on diversity too. So a lot of what we help companies do is increase access to opportunity from candidates to candidates from underrepresented backgrounds, and that's just like a huge part of our mission overall. And so what happens is once an employer's put in everything that they're looking for, and a candidate's put in everything that they're looking for, they end up getting a fit score out of 100. And what that allows us to do is out of all of the candidates on the RippleMatch system, we're able to identify who's actually the right fit for a position. If a candidate's a great fit, our software actually automates everything that a traditional campus recruiter would do. And so if you're Fisher and you're on Purdue's campus, and let's say you're working with Pfizer, who's a company we work with a lot, you'll get an email from our team that's totally automated but feels very human saying, Fisher, we noticed you've had this experience and that experience. We think you'd be a great fit for Pfizer for these reasons. And at that point, what ends up happening is if Fisher's interested, he's able to opt into the opportunity. And about 60% of the time, he'll get a first round interview. So the thing that killed me as a candidate going through the process was I would apply for 1 million jobs and I would always get rejected, which was just brutal, right? Nobody wants to go through that process. And so what's really different about our system is because candidates are getting fast-tracked to jobs that they're actually a good fit for and jobs that are geographically distributed, they're able to get matched with opportunities that are a good use of their time and that are an area where they really should be investing in the process. From there, if a company wants to connect with Fisher, or connect with David, or connect with Bailey, they'll just click this Get Introduced button right there. Our system learns on every acceptance and rejection, and so basically all of this feeds back into our machine learning model. We're constantly improving, and so in the same way that you'd train a junior recruiter on your team to increasingly look for the things that the hiring managers valued in the process, our system mirrors all of that and feeds it back in, so our matches get increasingly accurate over time. These badges just bring candidates to life a little bit. You can see things like work authorization. This fire symbol, I think our engineering team had a little bit of fun with, but basically means that a candidate's moving really fast in the system, and so you better hop on it if you want to, end up getting them into your job application process. And so, I guess to just like sum up what's like so important and so exciting about this, and the reason that I dropped out of school to dive in on this mission, I think that at our core as a society, and you see this, across all of the Democratic and Republican debates in general, right? There's this huge focus on jobs, huge focus on how do we get meaningful access to opportunity, and I think equalizing that area and just also having the process be fair and equitable for everyone starts in college, right? It starts in doing this not in a way that's just good from a societal perspective, but also in a way that's good from a company perspective because it's data-driven. It's encompassing really wide-ranging geographies, and it kind of cuts right to the heart of what a good recruiting process looks like. So if you are, I'll answer some questions, but if you're curious to learn more about what we're doing, we're hiring a ton right now. Troy and Jason right there will be here too, and if anyone wants to just like chat afterwards, we'd love to talk with you about potentially joining our team. And then from a sales perspective, if there's anyone who is looking to either increase diversity or candidate quality and wants to be part of a new system, I would love to talk with you too, and we'll be here. And with that, I'll kind of open it up for questions, but yeah.
Awesome. Just a quick question. How do you validate skills, right? How do you ensure that what somebody says they have as a skill is actually properly represented?
Yeah, the question is how do you validate skills and ensure that what a candidate actually says about their own abilities is accurately represented? So I think there's sort of two answers to that question. The first is that it's really tough to validate certain skills, right? So when you think about like values and motivations, if Fisher says that he values compensation a certain amount, there's no way of really validating that, right? That's just a demonstrated preference. For things like GPA, we verify with transcripts, and so we're able to make sure the system's accurate that way. One thing that we're increasingly passionate about is the assessment space, and that's actually something we're starting to think a lot about. I think it's one thing to sort of take a credential like a university degree and assume that means somebody is good at something. It's another to actually be able to measure it in an objective way. So we think about that a lot. We also try to just bring a lot of context around the data that's naturally collected. So I think people often assume that things like GPA are a great measure of someone's ability, but the reality is that there's just crazy grade inflation in Ivy League schools in particular. So a 3.5 at Brown is often the equivalent of a 3.0 at a historically black college and university or Berkeley, and so we try to add a lot of context to the actual data that companies are viewing as well. Yeah.
How do you make money? Do you charge candidates and the recruiters, or some combination?
How do you make money is the question, which is always a really good one for startups. In terms of our model, we sell annual subscriptions to employers, so it's completely free for candidates and always will be. On the employer side of things, we charge basically annual subscriptions ranging from $10,000 to $150,000 a year to get them on the platform and hire for a given role.
So my girlfriend is actually a recruiter, and her life is spent in LinkedIn. Is there like an API that plugs into that, or is the goal to sort of upend the workflow and replace a LinkedIn that they typically rely on, and replace that with RippleMatch? Where do you guys come into play there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of so the question is, do we plug into LinkedIn? And his girlfriend's a recruiter who spends a lot of her life in LinkedIn. So how do we think about either working or not working with LinkedIn? LinkedIn's really interesting right now. There was just a good article out the other day about how LinkedIn's going to kind of become what Craigslist was in some ways, with all of these different verticals attacking it and sort of splitting it off. At the entry level, LinkedIn is actually not used as widely because it just lacks information and access, and college students don't tend to use LinkedIn as much because they have, less revealing titles, less work experience, and they have less connections, so it's less about who they know. So right now, a lot of what we're doing is replacing the actual campus and like visiting these campuses physically. In the long run, though, I think the challenge with LinkedIn is that your girlfriend has to spend all day on it instead of hanging out with you or whatever it might be. And so what we ultimately think about doing is automating a lot of those workflows so she can just deal with talking to candidates rather than reaching out to them all day via messaging.
So yeah, time for one more. If you look at this side. George.
You talked a little bit about the reinforcement learning that picks up on actions that a user takes. How do you guard against inherent biases feeding back into the algorithms that
Do you mind just repeating that one more time?
Yeah, you talked about machine learning, reinforcement learning, actions that users take feeding a machine learning algorithm. How do you prevent inherent biases that somebody using your system may have from seeping in and affecting who you service?
Yeah, that's something we think a lot about, because if what you're
the question is
sorry. So in terms of the question, it's basically how do you prevent a machine learning model that's learning on people's interactions from then reflecting their own biases in the algorithm. I think one of the biggest challenges with a machine learning model is you're reflecting human behavior. So if that behavior ends up being problematic in some way, you end up reinforcing, the sort of biases that human beings have. The way that we think about that is we really carefully measure certain things that are likely to lead to the exclusion of underrepresented groups. And if we're seeing patterns in a recruiter's behavior that are likely to lead to sort of suboptimal outcomes, we address that head on in the account management process. So we try to be really proactive there. And what we find is that most companies, it really is unconscious bias. So it's not intentional, they're well-intentioned. And if you call them out on it, the reaction is generally pretty receptive there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andrew. Can we give a big round of applause to RippleMatch? Thanks, Andrew.